The zipper got stuck at the worst possible moment. And somehow, I ended up on my knees in front of him. Backstage was loud just seconds ago. Stylists arguing, assistants rushing, managers shouting about schedules. But the moment I stepped closer to him, everything went quiet. Too quiet. Like the air itself was holding its breath. He stood tall under the harsh white lights, jaw tight, shoulders tense, one hand braced against the dressing table. His costume pants were half-fastened, the zipper caught stubbornly at the middle. No one else dared to touch it. No one else dared to get that close. "Except me." "Fix it," the head stylist whispered sharply behind me. My hands trembled as I knelt. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room burning into my back. But the moment I reached forward, everything else disappeared. It was just him, me, and the dangerous closeness between us. I tried not to look up, tried to focus only on the stubborn zipper between my fingers. But it was impossible not to feel him. The heat radiating from his body. The faint scent of his cologne. Clean, sharp, expensive. The way his breathing slowed. As if he were suddenly aware of just how close I was. Too close. Closer than anyone was ever allowed to be. My fingers brushed against the fabric near his waist as I worked carefully to free the metal teeth. And then, his hand moved. Not touching me. Not quite. But hovering just above my shoulder. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. Close enough to make my heart pound violently in my chest. That was when I made the mistake of looking up. Eyes met. For the first time in 2 years. The man who had never once acknowledged my existence was staring directly at me. Not past me. Not through me. Me. His gaze was sharp, intense, unreadable. And for one dangerously long second, it didn't feel like he was looking at an assistant. It felt like he was seeing a woman. "Are you always this calm?" he asked quietly, his voice low and rough. "Or only when you're this close to me?" My breath caught, because in that moment I realized something terrifying. The zipper wasn't the only thing that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. Neither was the tension between us. For the rest of that day, I tried to pretend nothing had happened. That it had just been another backstage emergency. Another costume malfunction. Another moment of doing my job. But the way he kept looking at me made it impossible to believe that. First, it was subtle. So subtle I thought I was imagining it. While adjusting a rack of costumes near the filming monitors, I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. When I glanced up, he was already turning away. Nobody in Studio 7 knew about Oliver, because nobody in Studio 7 had ever asked. She had come to Seoul 18 months ago on a professional exchange program through a London fashion institute, carrying 2 suitcases, a work visa, a certification in theatrical costuming, and the specific, resilient optimism of someone who had already survived enough to know that hard things were survivable. She had grown up in Accra until she was 9, then London until she was 23, absorbing both cities completely, the color and heat of one, the precision and grit of the other, until she'd built herself into something that fit neither place perfectly and didn't particularly mind. She had gotten the wardrobe assistant position at Honstar Productions through 3 rounds of competitive interview and a practical skills test that she had, by every objective measure, passed better than any other candidate. She had known this because the panel coordinator had told her so, in the careful, apologetic tone of someone delivering mixed news. "Your scores are the highest we've seen. But the position will be very different for you than for others. You understand." She had understood. She had taken the job anyway. Seoul was beautiful and difficult in equal measure. The work was relentless. 10, 12, sometimes 14-hour days on set, managing costume continuity across 40-plus cast members, maintaining inventory, executing emergency repairs under time pressure, all while navigating a workplace where she was consistently the only black woman in any room she entered. Her Korean was functional now. She had studied every night for the first 6 months, but fluency and belonging were different things, and she had learned not to confuse them. She was good at her job. Genuinely, undeniably good. Mrs. Park, who complimented no one on principle, had told her once, exactly once, "Your stitching is acceptable." From Mrs. Park, This was the professional equivalent of a standing ovation. But good at the job and visible were, she had discovered, entirely separate categories. She ate lunch alone, usually at her workstation, because the break room conversations shifted when she entered in ways that were never quite hostile enough to name and never quite comfortable enough to ignore. She had one friend on the production, Una, a props assistant with loud opinions and a generous spirit, who checked in on her regularly and had once physically stepped between Oliver and a senior crew member who'd spoken to her in a way that everyone pretended hadn't happened. And then there was Kong Jae-woo. For 2 years, across 2 separate productions she'd worked on that had featured him, Kong Jae-woo had existed in Oliver's world the way the sun existed, permanently present, undeniably powerful, and completely indifferent to her specifically. She had handed costumes. Through doorways he'd walked through seconds later. She had repaired hems on jackets he'd worn without ever being in the same frame as him when he wore them. She had stood in rooms with him dozens of times without once catching his eye, because his eye had never once moved in her direction. She had told herself this was fine. This was professional. This was normal. This was a man whose world and her world simply didn't overlap. They occupied the same building the way stars occupied the same sky. Present together, separated by the kind of distance that made contact technically impossible. She had believed this completely. Right up until 4 minutes ago, when she had knelt on the floor in front of him and everything she had so carefully organized had quietly, irrevocably rearranged itself. Oliver zipped her toolkit closed, stood up, and walked back to her costume rack. She hung a jacket, straightened a collar, checked a hem. "He asked for your name," said the quiet, treacherous voice in the back of her mind that she had very little patience for. "He said your name." She pressed her lips together and reached for the next costume. "He looked at you like you were the first real thing he'd seen in years." "Stop," she told herself firmly. "He was talking to you. Actually talking." She focused on the fabric in her hands. The stitching. The work. The only safe territory she had. Across the room, she heard Mrs. Park say something sharp to a junior stylist. Heard the set doors open and close as crew members filed in and out. Heard the normal, reliable sounds of a production finding its rhythm again. She exhaled slowly. Whatever had just happened, whatever that moment had been, it was a single moment. A small, strange, unrepeatable blip in the otherwise consistent pattern of her invisibility. Tomorrow, Kong Jae-woo would walk past her in the corridor and look through her like glass, and the pattern would restore itself, and everything would be exactly as it had always been. She was sure of this. She was almost completely sure of this. "Why aren't you nervous?" She straightened the last jacket on the rack. Ran her hand along the hem to check the fall. "Because being nervous wouldn't have fixed your zipper." Oliver allowed herself exactly 3 more seconds of thinking about the look on his face when she'd said it, that fractional, almost invisible shift in his expression, like something waking up behind his eyes. And then she shut it down completely. Filed it away. Sealed it. She had a job to do. She had always had a job to do. She picked up her toolkit and went back to work. 3 days passed after the zipper incident. 3 days in which Oliver convinced herself, with increasing confidence, that the moment had been exactly what it appeared to be on the surface. A 2-minute professional interaction between a senior talent and a junior staff member, elevated in her memory by stress and proximity and the particular kind of heightened imagination that came from spending too many lunch breaks eating alone with her own thoughts. Kong Jae-woo had looked at her. He had spoken to her. He had let his fingers graze the back of her hand in what was almost certainly an accident of movement and physics, and had absolutely nothing to do with intention. That was all. She was sure of it. She was completely, professionally, entirely sure of it. And then came day 4. It was a Tuesday. Oliver knew this because Tuesdays were fitting days. The long, detailed sessions where principal cast members came through the wardrobe department one by one to be checked, adjusted, and confirmed for the upcoming shooting schedule. She had 17 costumes to review, 4 hems to re-examine, and 1 custom jacket that had come back from the external tailor with a shoulder seam that was 2 millimeters off and was going to require her full attention. She was bent over the jacket at her workstation, seam ripper in hand, when the wardrobe room door opened. She didn't look up. People came in and out of the wardrobe room constantly on fitting days. She had learned to track entries by sound alone. The light, quick step of the makeup team, the heavy rolling of the props cart, the precise click of Mrs. Park's low heels. These footsteps were none of those. They were slow, deliberate, evenly weighted in a way that communicated that the person making them had decided exactly where they were going and was in no particular hurry to prove it to anyone. Oliver looked up. Kang Jae-woo stood in the doorway of the wardrobe department. He was in his own clothes. Dark fitted trousers, a simple gray long-sleeved shirt with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, hair unstyled and slightly falling across his forehead in a way that his public-facing image rarely allowed. He looked, Oliver's brain noted with the calm detachment of a person watching a building fall, genuinely devastating. He was looking at her. She straightened slowly, seam ripper still in hand. Mrs. Park materialized from somewhere near the pressing station with the supernatural speed she deployed whenever talent entered her domain. Kang-sai, your fitting is not until 3 o'clock. I know, he said, politely, completely unmovably. I need a specific adjustment on the scene 4 ensemble. The wrist lining on the left sleeve is catching. Mrs. Park nodded, already moving toward the costume rail. Of course, I'll have Jae-hee take a look right away. I want her to do it. The room recalibrated in real time. Oliver watched Mrs. Park's hand stop on the rail. Watched 2 junior stylists exchange a look so fast it was practically subliminal. Watched the ambient noise of the room drop 3 full degrees. Her. Mrs. Park's voice was professionally neutral, but Oliver had worked alongside this woman long enough to hear the precise frequency of her surprise. Oliver, Jae-woo said, clearly, without elaboration or apology. I want Oliver to do it. He said her name the way someone says a word they have practiced privately. Like he knew the shape of it already. Mrs. Park turned to look at Oliver with an expression that communicated, in extraordinary efficient silence, a complete novel's worth of things she would not be saying aloud. Then she gestured once with her chin, a sharp, resigned flick, and walked back to the pressing station. Oliver set down the seam ripper. She crossed the room, retrieved the scene 4 jacket from the rail, and said in her most even and professional voice, "Let me see the sleeve, please." Jae-woo extended his left arm. She examined the wrist lining. He was right, there was a catching issue, a small fold in the underlining that would create friction during movement and would show up on camera as a subtle but visible distraction. She could fix it in under 10 minutes with the right needle and thread. She got her kit. She worked. He stood perfectly still for her, which she had not expected. Talent, in her experience, fidgeted. They got distracted, checked their phones, shifted weight, made small talk with anyone except the person working on them. Jae-woo simply stood and let her work with the complete, patient stillness of someone who had decided she deserved his full cooperation. This, she discovered, was somehow more unnerving than fidgeting. She was 3 minutes into the repair, needle moving cleanly, thread tension correct, hands completely steady, when he spoke. "You've been here for 2 years. It wasn't a question." Oliver kept her eyes on the stitching. 18 months, she corrected quietly. I should have known that. She pulled the thread through. You have many people on your production team. That's not a reason. Oliver's needle paused for exactly half a second before she resumed. She chose not to respond to that, because there was no professional response to that, and she had made a decision to remain entirely within professional territory for the duration of this interaction. She finished the repair, examined the lining, ran her thumb along the corrected seam to confirm the lay. "Done," she said and stepped back. He lowered his arm, looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Oliver." Nobody had said her name in this building the way he said it, like it was a complete sentence on its own. She nodded once. "Of course." He left. Oliver stood in the silence he left behind and breathed very carefully through her nose for approximately 15 seconds. Then she went back to the jacket on her workstation and picked up the seam ripper again. Across the room, she felt rather than saw Mrs. Park watching her with the focused, calibrated attention of a scientist who had just observed something unexpected and was deciding what to do with the data. Oliver kept her eyes on the jacket. She had a job to do. It happened 3 more times in the following 10 days. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Kong Jae-woo did not make a show of it, which she would have preferred. A show she could have dismissed, could have pointed to as evidence of him being difficult or capricious or simply bored. What he did instead was quieter and therefore infinitely harder to categorize. On day 7, the set costume coordinator came to Oliver's workstation with a note, handwritten, which nobody did anymore, requesting that she be assigned to monitor the principal wardrobe rail during the afternoon filming block. This was technically a promotion in task level. It was also, as Oliver understood when she arrived on set and found herself stationed 12 meters from where Jae-woo was shooting his scene, a geographical reassignment. He didn't look at her during filming. He was working, completely intensely working, and she understood watching him move through a scene why 3 academies had given him their highest award. He transformed in front of a camera in a way that was almost alarming to witness up close. The contained, deliberate Jae-woo of the backstage room became something completely different on set. Open, present, electrically alive in the frame. But between takes, when he stepped back to his mark and the crew reset, his eyes found her. Just once. Just briefly. Just enough. On day 9, she was called by Mrs. Park to assist with an emergency repair on a shirt collar during a live filming break. 4 minutes, high pressure, needle and thread while the crew reset the lighting rig. She was already on her way out when Mrs. Park stopped her with one terse sentence. "He asked for you by name." Again. Oliver had no comment on this. She went and fixed the collar. On day 12, she arrived at work to find that someone had moved her workstation, without her request, without any logistical explanation she could identify, approximately 15 meters closer to the principal wardrobe section. When she asked the wardrobe coordinator about it, the woman shrugged with the elaborate casualness of someone who had been specifically told not to say anything. Oliver stared at her relocated workstation for a long moment. Then she sat down and went to work. Small blue diamond, the whispers begin. The staff noticed. They always noticed. A production set was its own closed ecosystem with its own highly developed information network, and any deviation in the established order of things, especially deviations involving the principal talent, traveled through it at extraordinary speed. Oliver first understood the scope of it on day 8, when she walked into the staff break room, and the particular quality of the silence that greeted her was different from the usual slightly uncomfortable but manageable silence. This was the charged silence of a conversation that had been happening before she entered, and had not so much stopped as been rapidly folded away. She got her coffee. She sat at her usual spot by the window. Jae-hee, one of the junior stylists, a sweet, slightly anxious girl who had never been deliberately unkind to Oliver, slid into the seat across from her with the energy of someone about to perform a social obligation they had been assigned. "Oliver sigh," she began carefully. "People are talking." Oliver wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "About. About 'cause I. Requesting you. Jae-hee lowered her voice. 3 times in 10 days. It's very unusual. He has never requested anyone specifically before. Not once, in the whole production. I fix things correctly," Oliver said. "That's probably all it is." Jae-hee looked at her with the expression of someone who believed this slightly less than fully. "Maybe," she said. "But people are saying other things." Oliver met her eyes steadily. "Let them." She drank her coffee. She went back to work. But she was not as unbothered as she sounded, and she knew it, and she suspected Jae-hee knew it too. The thing was, and this was the part she couldn't straighten out, couldn't flatten into something manageable and safe, it wasn't just that he was noticing her. It was how he was noticing her. Kong Jae-woo didn't flirt. He didn't find reasons to be near her, didn't manufacture conversation, didn't do any of the things that would have made his intentions easy to name and therefore easy to dismiss. He did something considerably more unsettling. He was simply aware of her, with a focused, quiet, unwavering awareness that she felt on her skin from across a room, and said almost nothing about it. He would pass her in the corridor and not stop walking, but his eyes would hold hers for a beat longer than they needed to. He would finish a scene and step off set, and without appearing to look for her, would orient slightly in her direction, the way a compass needle finds north without any drama or announcement. Once, only once, and she had replayed it more times than she would ever admit. He had stopped walking approximately 4 feet away from where she was working on a hem repair, and had simply stood there for a moment, watching her hands move. Not her face. Her hands. With the concentrated attention of someone studying something they found genuinely interesting. When she had looked up, he'd held her gaze for 2 seconds and then moved on without a word. She had put the needle through the fabric in completely the wrong place. She had fixed it. She always fixed it. But still. On day 14, Una appeared at Oliver's workstation at the end of the afternoon shift and sat on the edge of it with the calm, determined energy of someone who had made a decision. "Okay," she said in her direct, no-preamble way that Oliver loved about her. "Talk. About the fact that Kong Jae-woo looks at you like you are the only person in a room full of people, and you are pretending you haven't noticed." Oliver folded a costume with careful precision. He is a professional who has found a wardrobe team member whose work meets his standards. That is all. Una stared at her with an expression of profound patience. "Oliver. Una. He asked for you by name. He moved your workstation. Nobody confirmed he moved." "Girl." Una leaned forward. "I have worked in Korean entertainment for 4 years. I have never, not once, seen Kong Jae-woo request a specific staff member. Not once. He doesn't do that. He doesn't do any of this." He paused. "He sees you." Oliver's hands stilled on the fabric. She thought about the zipper. About the cool, accidental graze of his fingers across her hand. About him forming the shape of her name with his lips. About dark eyes finding her across a crowded set without appearing to search. "He sees you." She folded the costume, placed it on the rack, straightened the hanger. "He's still the lead actor," she said quietly. "And I am still the wardrobe assistant. And that distance doesn't close just because someone starts looking." Una was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "What if he's not just looking?" Oliver picked up her toolkit. "Then he'll have to do something more than watch," she said. And she meant it to sound firm and practical and closed. She wasn't entirely sure it did. She walked home through the Seoul evening, the city bright and loud and rushing past her in its beautiful, indifferent way, and she thought about quiet footsteps in a wardrobe doorway. About a man who said almost nothing and somehow made her hear everything. About what it meant to be seen, finally and fully, by the person who had looked through you for the longest time. She was not ready for what came next. But she was already, without quite meaning to be, waiting for it. Started with a look. Not Jae-woo's look. She had grown in the past 2 weeks, a complicated and carefully managed relationship with Jae-woo's looks. Well, this was a different kind entirely. This was the look that Song Aryam, lead actress, face of 3 national cosmetic campaigns, and the woman whose name appeared above the title on every production poster, gave Oliver on a Wednesday morning when Oliver made the professional mistake of existing in the wrong corridor at the wrong time. Song Aryam was everything the Korean entertainment industry had decided a woman should be. Slender and precise, with a kind of effortless beauty that required approximately 3 hours of daily effort to maintain. She was not a bad actress. She was, in fact, genuinely talented in the moments when the script allowed her to be. And in the early weeks of the production, she had treated Oliver with a specific brand of pleasant indifference that senior talent reserved for production staff they had no reason to notice. That had been before Jae-woo started noticing Oliver. The corridor encounter lasted 4 seconds. Oliver was carrying a costume rail section toward the wardrobe room. Aryam was walking the opposite direction with her personal assistant and 2 members of her styling team. They passed each other in the narrow space, and for just a moment, just the width of a heartbeat, Aryam's eyes slid to Oliver's face and stayed there. It was not a hostile look. That would have been easier to process. It was an assessing look. The look of a woman recalibrating a situation she had previously considered beneath her attention. Oliver held her pace, her expression neutral, her eyes forward. She rounded the corner and let out a very slow, very quiet breath. Here we go, she thought. By the end of that week, the whispers had graduated into something with more structure and ambition. Oliver first heard it, really heard it, with enough detail to understand the shape of what was being built, on a Thursday afternoon, when she came back from the bathroom and found the wardrobe room 3 degrees quieter than it should have been. The specific quiet of a conversation that had been happening in her absence and had not fully recovered from her return. She had gone to her workstation. She had picked up her work. She had listened with the focused peripheral attention she had developed over 18 months of being the person who made rooms slightly uncomfortable. The words she caught were fragments, always finding reasons. You've seen how she positions herself. Coincidence? 3 times in 2 weeks. But fragments, she had learned, were enough. The impressive part was how easily people believed it. She was, after all, the easiest person in the building to cast as ambitious. She was foreign. She was black. She was curvy in a workplace that had strong opinions about the correct dimensions of a woman's body. She was good at her job in a way that some people experienced as threatening before they'd identified why. Every single thing that made her who she was could be reframed, in the right light and the right tone of voice, into evidence for the story they were telling. She had known this since childhood. She had learned to carry it without letting it collapse her. But knowing a thing and living inside it were always different. The direct confrontation, if it could be called that, came on a Friday. Oliver was in the principal fitting room doing a final check on Ariam's Act 4 costume, a stunning deep blue silk ensemble that required approximately 40 minutes of careful pressing and alignment to lie correctly on the body. She was on her knees again, this time adjusting the hem fall, when the door opened and Ariam entered early. Oliver rose. Song SSI. Your fitting isn't scheduled for another. I know when my fitting is, Ariam said pleasantly. She settled into the fitting chair and crossed one elegant leg over the other and looked at Oliver with the patient, almost friendly expression of a woman who had decided to make a point and had all the time in the world to make it. I wanted to speak with you privately. Oliver waited. She was good at waiting. You're the foreign wardrobe assistant, Ariam said. Oliver. Yes. Asterisk. You're very good at your work. Everyone says so. Asterisk. She paused. Mrs. Park is quite protective of you. Mrs. Park has high standards for everyone on her team. Ariam's mouth curved slightly. Jaiwoo has been requesting your assistance. Oliver kept her voice even. He has found my work satisfactory. I'm sure he has. Another pause precisely waited. Asterisk. You understand that Jaiwoo's image is very important. To the production. To his career. To many people who depend on both. Asterisk. She looked at her nails, a gesture of such practiced casualness that it was obviously not casual at all. Any distraction from his focus right now would be very unfortunate. Oliver looked at her steadily. I agree completely, she said. Which is why I focus exclusively on my work every day I come in. Ariam held her gaze for a moment. Read her. Found, apparently, something she hadn't expected, because the pleasant expression flickered once, just once before resettling. Good, she said finally. Then we understand each other. Completely, Oliver said. She finished the hem check. She packed her kit. She walked out of the fitting room with her back straight and her pace unhurried and her hands, as always, completely steady. She made it to the stairwell before she sat down on the bottom step, braced her elbows on her knees, and pressed her fingers against her closed eyes for 60 seconds. Breathe, she told herself. Just breathe. That weekend, 2 days alone in her small, neat apartment in Mapogu, surrounded by the comfortable order she maintained carefully in the one space that was entirely hers, Oliver made a decision. She was going to create distance. Not dramatically. Not in any way that could itself be turned into a story. But quietly, professionally, with the same deliberate invisibility that had kept her employed and intact for 18 months. She would do her job. She would do it perfectly. She would find reasons to redirect any specific requests toward other team members. She would be present and professional and completely, carefully unremarkable. She could not afford to lose this job. She had a visa tied to this contract. She had rent and a family in London who thought she was doing brilliantly and whom she was not going to call with a story about Korean workplace politics, and a man who looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. She had a career she was building with her own two hands in a country that had not made it easy, and she was absolutely not, going to let it unravel because someone famous had decided to notice her. She was not the girl in a story. She was a wardrobe professional with a hem to fix and a schedule to maintain and a life to protect. The decision felt clean. Practical. Correct. She was almost at peace with it. The first day she implemented her plan, Kang Jae-woo noticed within 40 minutes. She knew this because she was crossing the far side of the set with a costume bundle when she felt, the shift in his attention from across the room. That particular quality of awareness that she had, despite all her best intentions, learned to recognize the way you learn to feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm arrives. She did not look up. She kept walking. During the filming break, when Mrs. Park would normally have sent Oliver to check the principal costume rail, she had quietly arranged for Jae-hee to cover it instead. Jae-hee had done so without comment, because Jae-hee had absorbed enough of the situation by now to understand the geometry of it, even if she hadn't been given the explicit shape. Oliver worked at her station. She was efficient and excellent and extremely focused on the fabric in her hands. She was aware, with the peripheral vision she would rather not have had, that Jae-woo had looked in her direction twice. That the second time, he had held the look slightly longer than the first. That something in his posture had changed. A subtle adjustment, the kind of recalibration she had learned to read, when he had clocked the deliberate rerouting of his requests to Jae-hee. He said nothing. He went back to work. But later, as the afternoon shoot was wrapping, as the lights came down and the crew began packing and Oliver was loading the costume rail for transit back to the wardrobe room, she became aware of him standing approximately 6 feet behind her. She had not heard him approach. She never did. She continued loading the rail. Oliver. One word. Name. That private, practiced frequency. He turned. He was closer than she'd calculated. Close enough that she had to adjust her chin upward slightly to hold his eye line. His filming day had left his hair slightly displaced, and there was the faintest trace of tiredness around his eyes that his controlled expression worked to contain. He looked like this startlingly human. She held his gaze professionally. Sigh. Is there something you need adjusted? He looked at her for a long moment, reading as always in that focused, unhurried way of his. Is something wrong? He asked quietly. Not at all, she said. Jae-hee is an excellent stylist. I hope the fitting was. I didn't ask about the fitting. Oliver held very still. I asked, he said with the same quiet precision he put into everything, if something was wrong. The set was emptying around them. Crew members moving past, equipment being loaded, conversations happening at normal volume in every direction. And somehow, despite all of it, the 6 feet of space between her and Kang Jae-woo felt like its own entirely separate room. She looked at him steadily and said, with every ounce of professionalism she owned, everything is fine. I'm doing my job. Something moved behind his eyes. Not hurt. She wasn't sure Kang Jae-woo did hurt in any conventional direction, but something registering, noting, filing away with the same careful attention he applied to everything that concerned her. He nodded once, stepped back, walked away. Oliver turned back to the costume rail, loaded the last piece, gripped the handle. Down the corridor, Jae-hee fell into step beside her without being asked, took the other side of the rail, and helped her push it in comfortable, generous silence. He's not going to stop, Jae-hee said eventually. Quietly, without judgment, Oliver stared straight ahead. He has to, she said. Neither of them believed it. I built a wall. I built it carefully, from professional distance and practical sense and very good reasons. What I didn't understand yet was that Kang Jae-woo was not the kind of man who saw walls as obstacles. He saw them as information. And the wall I'd built around myself had told him everything he needed to know. The morning of the Scene 12 shoot started like every other morning. Oliver arrived at Studio 7 at 6:45, 45 minutes before her official start time, because she had learned in the first month that the first person in the wardrobe room controlled the pace of the whole day. She made coffee, real coffee, from the small French press she kept in her locker because the production-supplied instant was an act of violence against the concept of mourning. She reviewed the day's costume schedule. She checked the principal rail. She pressed 2 shirts that the overnight team had left with collar creases that would catch the camera light wrong. She was good. She was organized. She was completely, professionally in control of her domain. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. Scene 12 was the centerpiece of the entire drama. Director Choi had been building toward it for 11 episodes. The moment where the 2 leads, after a season of conflict and longing and perfectly calibrated almost touches, finally closed the distance. It was a kissing scene, but calling it that the way you'd call any other kissing scene was like calling a storm a light breeze. This was the emotional apex of the entire production. The scene that the network had specifically referenced in the budget approval. The scene that entertainment journalists had been speculating about for months, based on leaked script fragments. It required Song Aryam and Kang Jae-woo in a single extended take. No cuts, no camera tricks, pure sustained performance. In the center of a set dressed to represent a rain-soaked rooftop at golden hour. 40 crew members. 12 camera angles. A lighting rig that had taken 2 days to construct and cost approximately as much as Oliver's entire contract. The call time was 9 a.m. By 9:20, Song Aryam had not appeared. By 9:35, the atmosphere on set had shifted from the normal pre-shoot tension into something with sharper edges. Director Choi was on his phone. Aryam's personal assistant was on her phone. 3 separate production assistants were deployed to various corners of the building conducting what was described as a wellness check, and what everyone understood to be a frantic search. Oliver was stationed at the costume rail along the left side of the set, performing her standard continuity checks, when Yoona appeared at her elbow. "Aryam's not coming," Yoona said very quietly, from behind the clipboard she was using as conversational camouflage. Oliver's hands stilled on the costume. "What?" "She's at a hospital," her personal assistant just told the production coordinator. "It's being kept quiet, but..." Yoona lowered her voice further. "She had some kind of reaction last night. Apparently from a new product her team used. She can't film today. Possibly not for several days." Oliver absorbed this information. Looked at the set. At the 40 crew members. At the lighting rig that had cost a fortune. At Director Choi, whose face had moved through several distinct emotional stages and appeared to be settling, with grim determination, on controlled panic. "The studio," Oliver said slowly, "has a contractual delivery deadline for this episode," Yoona confirmed. "In 9 days. Scene 12 needs to be in the can before then or they're in breach and the financial penalties are." She made a gesture that communicated a number too large to say out loud. Oliver turned back to the costume rail. "They'll push the schedule," she said. "Reshoot next week. The set comes down in 48 hours for the next production booking. Rebuilding it costs 3 times the original build. Director Choi is trying to find a solution right now." Across the set, Director Choi snapped his phone shut and raised his voice to the assembled crew with the raw, unfiltered energy of a man who had run out of good options and was making peace with the remaining ones. "Listen up. We are shooting scene 12 today. We will use angle coverage and post-production to work around our principal cast situation. What I need right now is a stand-in. Female. Similar height and build to Song Aryam. Someone who can hold a position and follow direction." He looked around the set with the rapidly scanning eyes of a man doing brutal triage. "Someone. Her." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Whoa. Certain." Carrying the absolute, immovable weight of a decision already made. Oliver didn't need to look to know the voice. She looked anyway. Kang Jae-woo was standing at his mark in the center of the rooftop set, still in his costume, completely composed, looking directly across the room at her. His arm was raised, one finger extended. Not pointing with aggression but with the calm, unambiguous clarity of a man indicating the only correct answer to a question the room hadn't finished asking yet. "Her," he said again. Oliver. The set went silent in the particular way that only happens when something occurs that nobody's nervous system has a prepared response for. 40 people holding breath simultaneously. The hum of the lighting rig suddenly audible in the absence of all other sound. Oliver felt the weight of every eye in the room locate her and settle. Her heart was doing something loud and structural behind her ribs. She ignored it with the focused aggression of a woman who had not survived 18 months in this industry by letting her heart make professional decisions. Kong SSI. Director Choi began, in the voice of a man being offered a lifeline and trying to assess whether it had weight limits. The angles you need are all partial coverage, Jaiwoo said, with the even practicality of someone who had clearly already worked through the logistics. Back of the head. Profile. Over shoulder. You don't need Ariam's face for any of them. You need a body. The right height. Someone who can hold still and follow direction. Precise pause. She can do it. Director Choi looked at Oliver. Oliver looked at Director Choi. Then she looked at Jaiwoo, standing at his mark with that impossible stillness, watching her with dark eyes that were asking something much larger than the scene required, and said in a voice she was proud of for its steadiness, "I am a wardrobe assistant." "I know what you are," Jaiwoo said quietly. "I'm asking what you can do." What followed was 12 minutes of the most concentrated professional pressure Oliver had ever experienced. Director Choi pulled her aside and explained the camera coverage plan with the urgent, detailed efficiency of a man spending money with every passing minute. The angles were genuine, all partial. Back of head. Right profile behind Jaiwoo's shoulder. One close insert of clasped hands that would require staging but not her face. The kiss itself would be covered by Jaiwoo's angle exclusively. Her face would never be in frame. "No one will see you," he said. "Not the audience. You will be completely covered." He looked at her with the frank desperation of a director staring at a production crisis. "I need someone I can direct. Someone who won't freeze. Your supervisor says you don't freeze." From across the room, Mrs. Park met Oliver's eyes and gave her one small, unreadable nod. Which from Mrs. Park was the closest thing to "I believe in you" that existed in her entire emotional vocabulary. The costume team found a dress in Ariam's approximate silhouette from the backup rail. Deep burgundy, floor length, structured enough to hold its shape on camera. Oliver changed in 4 minutes. Her hair was unpinned and quickly styled into something that read, from the back, as period appropriate. She stood in the center of the set in someone else's costume and looked at the rooftop set. The dressed concrete, the artificial golden light, the light machines producing a gentle manufactured mist, and breathed through the very genuine fear that was moving through her system like weather. "Cannot do this. I am not an actress. I am a wardrobe assistant and I fix hems and I." "Oliver." A turn. Jaiwoo had crossed to her. He was close, closer than the professional distance she had been carefully maintaining for 2 weeks, and he was looking at her with those focused, unwavering eyes that had the deeply inconvenient quality of making her feel like the only fixed point in a moving room. He said nothing for a moment, just looked at her face with the calm, methodical attention of a person assessing what they're working with, reading her fear, not dismissing it, not minimizing it, just seeing it the way he saw everything, completely and without flinching. Then quietly, so quietly it arrived like a private thing meant only for her. "Trust me." 2 words. Delivered without performance, without persuasion, without the particular pressure of someone who needed her to agree. Just a statement of available fact, offered simply like an open hand. Oliver looked at him for a long moment. Then she breathed in, breathed out. "Tell me exactly where to stand," she said. The first 2 takes were technical. Director Choi walked them through the blocking with the precise, businesslike energy of a man on a budget countdown. Oliver followed direction with the focused competence she applied to every professional task. Hitting marks, holding positions, adjusting angles when asked. She was present. She was controlled. She was managing. Jaiwoo worked with her the way he worked on set. Completely, attentively, with a heightened focus that transformed him in front of a camera. But between the direction and the lighting checks and the technical resets, She was aware of him calibrating to her specifically, adjusting his approach, his angles, his physical positioning, in ways that made her job easier. Protecting her, she realized, within the frame. The first 2 takes were technical. Director Choi walked them through the blocking with the precise, businesslike energy of a man on a budget countdown. Oliver followed direction with the focused competence she applied to every professional task. Hitting marks, holding positions, adjusting angles when asked. She was present. She was controlled. She was managing. Jae-woo worked with her the way he worked on set. Completely, attentively, with a heightened focus that transformed him in front of a camera. But between the direction and the lighting checks and the technical resets, she was aware of him calibrating to her specifically, adjusting his approach, his angles, his physical positioning, in ways that made her job easier. Protecting her, she realized, within the frame, making sure the coverage plan held. Scene 12. Final sequence. Take 3. The set fell into shooting silence. Oliver stood at her mark. The artificial golden light fell warm across the dressed concrete around her. Somewhere above, the mist machines created their manufactured atmosphere. The world of the set, the cameras, the crew, the 40 people watching, receded into the background noise of her heartbeat. Jae-woo stepped into the scene. And the thing that happened next she could not, afterward, find a fully professional explanation for. He moved toward her within the scene, slowly, with a particular quality of presence he carried in performance, which was different from his everyday presence the way a live current was different from a still wire. And as he reached her mark, he raised one hand and placed it, with careful deliberateness, along the line of her jaw. The touch was light. Exactly as light as the scene required. Her breath stopped working normally. His eyes found hers and held. And the look he gave her was not the look of an actor finding his scene partner's eye line. It was the look he had been giving her for 2 weeks from across crowded rooms. The same focused, unhurried, completely present attention. The look that said "I see you" without requiring a single word to carry it. The world did not disappear. Oliver was too grounded, too present, too achingly aware of every sensation to disappear anywhere. But it narrowed, rapidly and completely, until the only thing with any reality was the warmth of his hand against her jaw and the dark, steady weight of his eyes on hers. He leaned in. And she let him. The kiss was soft at first, the choreographed gentleness of a scene's opening beat. His lips against hers, careful and present. The script called for 3 seconds. Clean. Restrained. Emotionally legible. 3 seconds passed. He didn't pull back. She didn't pull back. What happened in the seconds after that she would spend a long time afterward trying to describe and failing, because it didn't belong to the category of things that language was built for. The warmth of it. The realness of it. The way his hand shifted, almost imperceptibly, against her jaw. Not to direct, not to perform, but simply because something in him needed to hold on to something. The way her hand rose, without instruction from her rational mind, and found the fabric of his costume at his chest. Felt nothing like acting. It felt exactly like the thing she'd been trying not to name for 2 weeks. Somewhere behind the cameras, she heard it distantly, like sounds arriving through water. Someone made a sharp, involuntary sound. The kind of sound a room makes when it watches something it wasn't supposed to see. Director Choi did not call cut. He let it run. When they finally separated, slowly by degrees, the way 2 things separate when the force holding them together releases gradually rather than all at once, Oliver kept her eyes down for 2 full seconds before she trusted them. When she looked up, Jae-woo was still close, still looking at her. His expression had moved, shifted into something she hadn't seen on his face before, something unguarded and undefended and almost painfully honest. "Cut," Director Choi said finally. His voice had a quality to it she couldn't identify. That's the one. We have it." The set exhaled. Oliver stepped back. 1 step. Professional distance reasserting itself like a reflex. Around them, the crew reactivated. But slowly, and with a particular quality of motion that people had when they were simultaneously trying to resume normal operations and process something that had shifted the furniture of the room. She saw the camera operator exchange a look with his assistant. Saw two crew members near the lighting rig speaking in low, rapid voices. Saw Yuna standing near the side entrance, with an expression on her face that was equal parts wonder and deeply concerned love. Oliver walked off the set mark, walked to the costume rail, picked up her toolkit with both steady hands. Her face was giving nothing away. The rest of her was a different story entirely. Song Ariam walked back through the Studio 7 doors at 4:17 p.m. Oliver knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock above the wardrobe room door with the focused attention of a person who understood, on some deep structural level, that the day was not finished with her yet. She had changed back into her staff uniform. She had rehung the burgundy dress with careful, precise hands. She had returned to her workstation and resumed the jacket repair she had abandoned that morning and worked on it with the concentrated energy of someone using a task as a life raft. She had almost convinced herself that the worst of it was over. Then she heard the sound of Song Ariam's heels on the corridor floor. Ariam moved through the building differently than she normally did. Oliver registered this before she consciously identified it. The pace was faster, the usual choreographed grace replaced by something more direct and driven. Her personal assistant was half jogging to keep up. Her expression, visible through the wardrobe room's interior window as she passed, was arranged into the particular configuration of a woman who had received information she had not asked for and was deciding, at high speed, what to do with it. Someone had told her. Of course someone had told her. The production set of Studio 7 had approximately the information containment capacity of an open window in a storm. 40 crew members had watched that kiss happen in real time. 40 crew members had phones. And Song Ariam, whose personal assistant monitored social feeds and production channels as part of her professional brief, had apparently received the update before she'd even reached the building. Oliver kept her eyes on the jacket in her hands. She heard Ariam's footsteps stop, heard the wardrobe room door open, heard Mrs. Park's voice, sharp, controlled, managing, intercept whatever was about to happen at the threshold. She did not look up. Where is she? Ariam's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was precise and cold and completely stripped of the pleasant social architecture she normally maintained. The wardrobe girl. Where is she? Songsai, if you'll come with me to the... I am not going anywhere. I want to speak with her. Oliver set down the jacket. Turn. Ariam was standing in the doorway with Mrs. Park positioned in the careful geometry of a woman doing professional interception. The junior stylists had performed the collective disappearing act that junior stylists perfected in situations like this. It was just the three of them and the particular quality of tension that came with them. Oliver held Ariam's gaze. She had learned, from her mother, from years of being the only one in rooms that hadn't expected her, never to look away first in these moments. Looking away was an admission of something she hadn't done. Songsai, she said evenly. I'm glad you're feeling better. Something flashed in Ariam's eyes. She stepped past Mrs. Park into the room. You were on my set, she said. In my costume. In my scene. With my... She stopped. Reorganized. You had no right to be there. I was directed there by Director Choi, Oliver said. The production needed a stand-in for coverage angles. I followed professional instruction. You followed, Ariam said softly. An opportunity. The word landed with surgical precision. Oliver absorbed it without flinching. I understand you're upset, she said. I would be too. But I want to be clear. I did not engineer this situation. I was. You were on your knees in front of him 2 weeks ago. Ariam's voice was still quiet, still devastatingly controlled. And now you're kissing him on my set. And you want me to believe that's coincidence. Song SSI. Mrs. Park's voice carried a warning note. I'm simply asking a question, Ariam said pleasantly. She looked at Oliver for one final, measuring moment. Then she turned and walked out. The door swung shut behind her. The room held its silence for several seconds. Mrs. Park turned to Oliver. Her expression was not unkind, which, from Mrs. Park, was a form of profound compassion. Go home, she said quietly. Today is finished. Oliver nodded, picked up her kit, walked out. Small blue diamond, the internet wakes up. She discovered the scale of it that night. She had been home for 2 hours, had eaten, had showered, had sat on her floor with her back against the bed, and worked through the day's events with a methodical emotional discipline she applied to things she couldn't change, when Una called. "Don't go on social media," Una said by way of greeting. Oliver's stomach dropped 3 floors. How bad? Pause that told her everything. Someone on set posted. Just a few words, no footage. Productions are contractually tight on that, but enough. Foreign staff member replaces lead actress in kissing scene with Kang Jae-woo. Full take. Not a rehearsal. That's all. That was enough. Yuna's voice was carefully gentle. It spread. The comments are, people are making assumptions. About how it happened. About why Kang SSI chose you. About what you must have. She stopped. You know how people talk. Oliver knew exactly how people talked. She had been the subject of how people talked in enough contexts to have an entire vocabulary for it. How many? She asked. The original post has been shared 4,000 times in 3 hours. She closed her eyes. There's a hashtag, Una said, even more gently. I'm not going to tell you what it says. I'm going to tell you to stay off your phone tonight, and I'm going to come over tomorrow morning with coffee, and we are going to figure this out together. Okay. Okay, Oliver said. She hung up, looked at her phone, put it face down on the floor. She did not go on social media. She sat in her quiet apartment and listened to the city outside her window and let herself, for exactly 15 minutes, feel the full weight of the unfairness of it. The complete, breathtaking unfairness of having done nothing wrong. Having been pushed into a situation, directed through it professionally, and then having the situation turned in public narrative into evidence of her own manipulation. 15 minutes. She allowed herself exactly that. Then she got up, made tea, sat at her small desk, and began composing with steady hands and a clear head, her letter of resignation. Small blue diamond, the letter. She wrote it carefully, professionally, in the measured, precise language of someone who understood that documents outlasted feelings and should therefore be constructed accordingly. She cited personal reasons. She cited the desire to avoid disruption to the production. She thanked Mrs. Park, Director Choi, and the Honstar Productions team for the opportunity. She said nothing about Ariam. She said nothing about Jae-woo. She said nothing about zipper mechanisms or burgundy dresses or kisses that lasted longer than 3 seconds and felt nothing like acting. She read it back, changed 2 words. Read it again. It was the right thing to do. She was certain of this. Her continued presence on the production was a disruption to everyone. To Ariam, whose working environment she had inadvertently destabilized. To the crew, who now had to navigate whatever the social media fallout produced. To the production itself, which did not need this story attached to it. And to herself. Mostly to herself. Because she had sat across from her own reflection in the dark window of her apartment and admitted the thing she had not said aloud to anyone, including Una, that she was frightened. Not of the comments online, which were ugly but distant. Not of Ariam, whose anger she understood and could manage. But of something closer and more specific and considerably more dangerous. She was frightened of what she felt when Jaiwa's hand had curved against her jaw. Of the way the world had narrowed to a single warm point of contact. Of the fact that she had not for 1 millisecond, not even with every professional instinct she owned firing simultaneously, wanted him to stop. And she was frightened because she was a wardrobe assistant in a foreign country on a visa tied to a contract, and he was Kang Jae-woo, and those 2 facts together produced a geography that had no safe route through it. No version of this ended well for her. The world had already demonstrated tonight, at scale and with hashtags, exactly what story it intended to tell. Leaving was the only rational move. She printed the letter, folded it, put it in an envelope with Director Choi's name on it, set it on her desk for morning, and went, eventually, to a sleep that was deeper and less restful than she needed it to be. Kang Jae-woo did not sleep that night. This was not entirely unusual. He was, by the nature of his work and the particular architecture of his personality, not a generous sleeper. His mind ran long after his body was still, processing, organizing, running and rerunning sequences of thought with the same perfectionist attention he applied to a difficult scene. He had learned to function on 5 hours the way some people learned a second language. Fluently, if not always comfortably. But this night was different. This night, he lay in the dark of his apartment, minimalist, immaculate, expensive in the way of things chosen for quality rather than display, and stared at the ceiling and thought about Oliver's face in the moment before he had kissed her. He had been running the moment on a loop since it happened. Not obsessively or perhaps obsessively, but with a controlled, analytical quality he applied to obsession so that it at least felt productive while it destroyed his peace. He was examining it, trying to understand what had occurred in the exact geography of those seconds, because something had occurred that he did not have an existing framework for, and it was bothering him with the particular intensity of an unresolved problem. He was going to fix this. He was going to fix it publicly and completely, and in a way that cost him something, because anything that cost him nothing was not, in this situation, enough. He just needed the right moment. He did not know yet that the moment was already coming for him. That Oliver was sitting at her desk in Mapogu with a resignation letter in an envelope, and his name was already leaving her professional world the way light left a room when a door closed. He did not know. But tomorrow he would. Oliver arrived at Studio 7 at 7 a.m. Not because she was scheduled. She wasn't scheduled. She had, after a careful and largely sleepless night, made her decision, and the decision did not include a schedule at Studio 7 beyond this morning. She arrived early because she wanted to do this quietly, before the building filled. Before the day built up its speed and noise and the 40-person ecosystem of the production came alive and turned the simple act of handing over an envelope into something witnessed and documented and whispered about. She had her toolkit. She had her personal items from her workstation packed into a canvas tote, the French press, the extra needles, the small framed photo of her mother and her 2 younger sisters that had sat in the corner of her workspace for 18 months and watched over every hem she'd repaired and every crisis she'd navigated with the patient, loving expressions of people who believed in her completely from very far away. She had the envelope. She was going to give it to Mrs. Park, who arrived earlier than anyone always. And then she was going to walk out through the Studio 7 doors and take the subway back to Mapogu and begin the practical process of figuring out what came next. She had options. She had skills. She had the kind of professional resilience that came from having rebuilt herself more than once already. She was going to be fine. She was telling herself this with considerable conviction as she pushed through the main entrance doors and crossed the lobby toward the wardrobe department corridor. She was so focused on the internal logistics of holding herself together that she almost walked directly into Una. "Oh!" Oliver stepped back. "Una, you're here early." Una was looking at her with an expression that contained several things at once: love, worry, and the particular guilt of someone who has information they are not sure how to deliver. She looked at the canvas tote on Oliver's shoulder, at the envelope in her hand, and her expression resolved into something quieter and more serious. "Oliver," she said carefully, "something is happening. I know something is happening. I'm resigning before it gets worse. That's the something." "No." Una shook her head slowly. "Something else." "Something." She glanced down the corridor. "You need to come with me." "Una, I just need to find Mrs. Park." "Mrs. Park is already there. Everyone is already there." Una reached out and touched Oliver's arm with the gentle firmness of someone steering a person toward something they need to see even if they're not sure they want to. "Come. Please." Oliver heard it before she understood it. The sound coming from the main production meeting room, the large glass-walled space at the center of the Studio 7 floor where full cast and crew briefings were held, was not the sound she associated with 7 a.m. in an empty building. It was voices, multiple voices, overlapping, carrying the particular charged quality of a room that was already operating at elevated emotional temperature. Through the glass wall, as Una guided her down the corridor, Oliver could see people. More people than should have been here this early. Production coordinators. Senior crew members. Mrs. Park, standing near the far wall with her arms folded and her expression locked into the careful neutrality she deployed when something significant was occurring and she was reserving judgment. Director Choi, seated at the head of the table with the look of a man who had arrived expecting a normal morning and had received something considerably different instead. Nkong Jaiwoo, standing at the front of the room. Oliver stopped walking. He was in his own clothes, black, simple, the kind of dress that looked effortless and wasn't. And he was standing with his characteristic stillness, but there was something different in it today. The stillness was not containing anything. It was the stillness of a person who had already released whatever they had been holding, and was now simply present with the decision they had made. He was talking. Oliver couldn't hear the words through the glass and the corridor distance. But she could see the room listening, the quality of the attention directed at him, the particular silence of people who had stopped whatever they were thinking to receive something unexpected. "What is he?" she started. "He called the meeting," Yuna said quietly beside her. "He was here at 6:30. He asked the production coordinator to get everyone in. Senior crew. Department heads. He said." Yuna paused. "He said he had something to address before the day started." Oliver stared through the glass. "Come on," Yuna said gently. "You should hear it." The door opened quietly. Yuna held it. Oliver stepped through. The room registered her arrival in sequence, heads turning, the small cascade of awareness moving from person to person. And for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was, Oliver stood in the doorway with her canvas tote on her shoulder and her resignation envelope in her hand and the eyes of approximately 25 people on her face. And then Jaiwoo turned. He had clearly heard the door. He looked at her across the length of the room with those dark, direct eyes, and something moved in his expression, something that in a less controlled man would have been visible relief, and he held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds before he looked back at the room. "Good," he said quietly. "She should hear this." Oliver did not move from the doorway. She was not sure her legs were prepared to commit to anything more specific than standing until she understood what was happening. "I'll be direct," Jaiwoo said. His voice in the room was the same as it always was. Low, even, carrying without effort. But there was something underneath it today that she hadn't heard before. Something stripped of its usual management. Something honest in the undefended way of a person who had decided that honesty was the only remaining move worth making. Yesterday's filming situation has generated external commentary that is being directed at a member of this production team. I am responsible for that situation. I made the decision to request her involvement. Director Choi made the professional call to proceed, but the origin of it was my request. I want that sequence of events to be clear to everyone in this room. The room was very still. The commentary being directed at Oliver, he continued, and her name in his mouth in this room, in front of these people, landed differently than it had in every private context before. Larger, more deliberate, carrying the specific weight of something being said publicly that was meant to be heard publicly, is based on a narrative that is factually incorrect. She did not engineer or pursue that situation. She responded professionally to a production crisis at the request of her department head, and at my specific recommendation. Any suggestion that her motivations were anything other than professional is wrong. I want to be clear that I am saying this directly and for the record. Director Choi was looking at his hands. Mrs. Park was looking at Jaiwoo. Most of the room was doing what rooms did when something they hadn't expected arrived. Absorbing it in real time, recalibrating, trying to locate the new shape of things. "Furthermore," Jaiwoo said, and here his voice shifted. Not louder but more precise, the way a blade is more precise than a club. "I want to address the specific claim that she has been positioning herself inappropriately with regard to my interactions. She has not. She has been professional at every point. The requests and interactions that have occurred over the past several weeks originated with me. All of them. She has, in fact, made consistent professional efforts to maintain distance that I did not make it easy for her to maintain. The responsibility for that is mine, not hers." Oliver's hand tightened around the envelope. "She should not be the one managing consequences for choices I made," Jaiwoo said simply. "That is not acceptable. And I am not going to allow it to continue." The silence that followed was the kind that had texture to it. Oliver could feel it against her skin, the weight of 25 people processing something that had rearranged their understanding of the room they were standing in. And then he turned, fully, and looked at her directly across all of it, across the table and the people and the professional geography that had kept them at careful distance for 18 months, and said with the same quiet, private frequency he had used every time he had said her name, "She didn't steal anything. Beep. I chose her." The room exhaled. Oliver felt something move through her that she could not name and did not try to. It moved from her chest outward, warm and destabilizing and completely beyond her management, and she let it move because there was nothing else she could do. The room did not erupt. It did not need to. The statement had been so complete, so cleanly delivered, that there was nothing dramatic left for the room to do. People simply adjusted. Conversations would happen later, in corridors and break rooms, and those conversations would have a very different shape than the ones from the night before. Oliver understood this. The narrative had been corrected at the source, in front of the people whose version of it mattered most to her daily reality. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, almost everything. Director Choi stood, cleared his throat, and said in the carefully practical voice of a man steering a ship back onto a professional course, "Right. Debriefing in 20. Everyone to their departments." The room began moving. Oliver stood in the doorway and watched people file past her, some avoiding her eyes, some meeting them briefly with the recalibrated expressions of people who had received new information and were updating accordingly. Una squeezed her arm as she passed and said nothing, which was exactly right. Mrs. Park walked past her last. Looked at the envelope in Oliver's hand with the sharp eyes of a woman who missed nothing. "Is that what I think it is?" she said. Oliver looked at the envelope. "I was going to." "Don't," Mrs. Park said. Simply. "Finally. You are the best hem technician on this production, and I will not be replacing you over someone else's poor behavior." She looked at Oliver with the closest thing to warmth that Mrs. Park's face was architecturally capable of producing. "Throw it away." She walked out. Oliver stood alone in the emptying room. She looked at the envelope, at the careful professional language she had constructed the night before to make her own exit clean and manageable and cost-free to everyone else. She looked up. Jaiwoo was still in the room. He had not followed the general exit. He was standing near the front, watching her with the patient certainty of a man who had said the thing he needed to say and was now simply waiting to see what came next. The room was empty except for them. Oliver walked toward him, slowly. The distance between the door and where he stood was not large, but she crossed it with a full awareness of what it meant. Every step a deliberate choice, made clearly and without the protective cover of professional obligation or production crisis or any external force she could point to later and say I had no option. She had options. She was choosing. She stopped in front of him. Closer than professional distance. The distance of two people who had stopped pretending professional distance was sufficient. She held up the envelope. "I was going to resign," she said. He looked at the envelope, then at her face. "I know. You didn't have to do that," she said. "What you just did. In front of everyone." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." She looked at him, at the face she had spent 18 months observing from careful distance and the past 2 weeks trying, with complete failure, to stop thinking about. At the scar along his left cheekbone she had only seen up close. At the dark eyes that were doing what they always did, seeing her. Completely. Without looking away. "You said trust me," she said. "On the set." "I remember." "I'm still deciding," she said, "whether you've earned it." Something happened in his expression then. The thing she had first glimpsed on the backstage floor when she'd answered him without fear. The thing that had been growing quietly behind his composed exterior for weeks. It was, she understood finally, the look of a man who had forgotten that things could surprise him. She surprised him. She had been surprising him from the beginning. And he found it. His expression told her in the unguarded clarity of this empty room. Completely and helplessly extraordinary. "That's fair," he said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she tore the envelope in half. Cleanly. Precisely. And dropped it in the waste bin beside the table. "Don't make me regret it," she said. and she walked out of the room to go to work. He could have stayed silent. It would have cost him nothing. I would have disappeared and the story would have moved on, and Kong Jaiwa's image would have remained exactly as managed and untouchable as it had always been. Instead, he stood in front of 25 people at 7 in the morning and told the truth. He chose me. Loud. In public. Where it cost him something. I had told myself I wasn't the girl in a story. But walking down that corridor with my toolkit on my shoulder and the warmth of something new and terrifying and completely real moving through my chest, I thought maybe I had been wrong about that. Maybe I had always been exactly her. I just hadn't met someone worth the story yet. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks in which Studio 7 recalibrated itself around the new shape of things. Working interactions were professional. Precise. She was good at her job and he was respectful of it in the specific, detailed way that told her he understood what the work involved. He didn't create reasons to linger. He didn't manufacture conversation or press into the space she was still defining. But he was present. Fully, quietly, consistently present in the way he had been since the beginning. That particular quality of attention that she felt on her skin before she registered it with her eyes. The last filming day before a production break. And the building was emptying with a particular relief of a crew releasing a week's worth of accumulated pressure. Voices were louder. Laughter came more easily. The heavy, operational focus of a shoot day was dissolving into something looser and more human. Oliver was the last one left in the wardrobe room. This was not unusual. She liked the room when it was empty. The orderly quiet of it, the racks of carefully maintained costumes, the clean smell of pressed fabric and cedar. She liked restoring it to order at the end of the week, returning everything to its correct position, leaving it ready for Monday with the quiet satisfaction of work completed correctly. She was covering the principal rail when she heard the footsteps. Low, deliberate, evenly weighted. She did not turn around immediately. She finished covering the costume she was on, smoothed the protective cloth, and then straightened and turned. Jaiwoo was standing in the wardrobe room doorway. Not in his costume. In his own clothes. A dark jacket over a simple white shirt, collar open. The casual end-of-week version of him that she had come to understand was the closest to unguarded that he allowed himself in the building. His hair was slightly displaced from a long day. He looked tired in the specific way that he rarely showed publicly, the tiredness around the eyes that his control usually managed into invisibility. He looked, she thought, completely real. "Everyone's gone," he said. "I know," she said. "I like it that way." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Or perhaps it was, in the particular vocabulary of a man for whom smiling was a considered and infrequent expression. "I know," he said. "You've always liked it that way." She looked at him. "You noticed that." "I noticed everything," he said simply. Without performance. The way he said all true things. As straightforward statements of fact that didn't require decoration. She turned back to the rail. Covered the next costume. Was aware of him crossing the room. Slowly, without pressure, and coming to stand near her. Not beside her. Near her. Respectful of the space she was still defining, but inside it enough that the air between them had its familiar quality of compression and warmth. "Oliver. Can I tell you something?" She kept her hands moving on the protective cover. "You usually just tell me things. You don't normally ask." That almost smile again. "I'm trying something different." She smoothed the cloth. Turned to face him fully. He was closer than she'd calibrated. Close enough that she could see the fine detail of him, the things that distance erased. The scar along his cheekbone. The slight asymmetry in his otherwise exact features that photographs always smoothed away. The dark eyes that were doing what they always did. Holding her completely without looking away, without managing the look into something safer than it was. "Tell me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the practiced silence of a man composing a performance. "The day you fixed my zipper," he said. She held very still. "I had been in that building for 2 years, he continued quietly. "I knew the director. I knew the production coordinators. I knew the lead cast and the senior crew, and I knew the layout of every room and the schedule of every shooting day. I did not know you. Had not seen you. And I do not. He stopped. Looked at her with an honesty so direct it was almost difficult to receive. I do not know how that is possible. I do not know how I was in the same rooms as you for 2 years and did not see you. But I didn't. And that morning, you on the floor with your toolkit and your steady hands, I looked down and I saw you. Oliver's hands were at her sides, completely still. I saw your hands first, he said. The way you worked. No panic. No performance for my benefit. Just competence. Pure, complete, completely unself-conscious competence. His eyes moved to her face. And then you looked up at me and I thought. He paused again. I thought, there she is. As if I had been looking without knowing I was looking. As if you were something I had been trying to find the shape of and had not had the right word for until that exact moment. Something moved through Oliver's chest, warm and structural and too large for its container. You asked me why I wasn't nervous, she said. You told me that being nervous wouldn't have fixed the zipper. It wouldn't have. No, he said. It wouldn't have. His gaze was steady and completely undefended. I have spent 8 years in this industry being Kong Jaiwoo in the way the industry needs me to be Kong Jaiwoo. Controlled, contained, precisely managed. And in all of that time very few people have ever simply looked at me. Without the weight of what I represent to them. Without calculating what proximity to me is worth. He looked at her with the focused, quiet certainty of a man delivering the most honest thing he has said in years. You looked at a stuck zipper and a human being who needed help. That is all. That was everything. Oliver felt the thing that had been building in her chest for weeks. Through zipper moments and corridor encounters and slow-burn 10-day vigils, and a kiss that lasted longer than the scene required, and a man tearing a narrative apart in a meeting room at 7 in the morning. Release. Quietly. Completely. Like a breath held too long finally let go. The day you fixed my zipper, Jaiwoo said, and his voice was lower now, carrying only as far as the space between them, was the first day I truly saw you. The wardrobe room was very quiet. Oliver looked at him. At this man who had looked through her for 2 years and then seen her so completely that the seeing had rearranged everything. At the face that was, up close and unguarded and tired from a long week, the realest thing in the room. She took 1 step forward. He did not move. He simply received it. The step, the closing of the careful professional distance she had maintained, the decision it represented. With a still, warm attention he gave everything that concerned her. She reached up and placed her hand, with the same precise, unhesitating steadiness she put into all her best work, against the side of his face. He exhaled, slowly. The contained, deliberate breath of a person releasing something they have been holding for a very long time. His hand came up and covered hers. Warm, certain. Holding it in place with the gentle, unambiguous firmness of a person who had made a decision and was done renegotiating it. I'm going to need you to be patient with me, Oliver said quietly. I don't do things I'm not sure about. I know, he said. I mean it. I'm not. She met his eyes. I'm not a girl who gets swept away. Think carefully. I take my time. I know that too, he said. I have been watching you think carefully and take your time for 18 months. Something genuine and warm moved in his expression. I am prepared to wait as long as you need. You're not very good at waiting, she said. You relocated my workstation. I was not, he admitted, with a gravity that barely concealed something that was almost remarkably sheepish. At my most patient. The laugh that came out of Oliver surprised her completely. Warm and real and unguarded. The laugh of a person who has not laughed genuinely in a room with another person in longer than they realized. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, she repeated. Simply. Completely. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he turned his face slightly and pressed his lips to her palm. Quiet, deliberate, a thing done for no audience and no camera and no production requirement. Just the two of them in an empty room at the end of a Friday. And a gesture that meant exactly what it was and nothing more complicated than that. Oliver closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she lowered her hand, stepped back, reached for her canvas tote and her toolkit with the steady, practiced efficiency of a woman who had work to finish. "I have 3 more costumes to cover," she said. He looked at the rail. Looked at her. Looked at the rail again with the expression of a man recalibrating his evening. "Show me what to do," he said. She looked at him. "You want to help cover costumes. I want to be where you are," he said. Simply. Without embarrassment. "If that is currently covering costumes, then yes." Oliver looked at him for a long moment. Then she handed him a protective cover and moved to the next costume on the rail. "Smooth it from the shoulder down," she said. "Don't rush it. If you rush it, the fabric catches." He followed her instruction with the same focused, unhurried attention he brought to everything. No performance. No impatience. Just present beside her. In the quiet of the room she had always liked best when it was empty. It turned out she discovered that she liked it differently now. She liked it with him in it.